Hello, I'm Marco Stocker and I'd like to briefly present you the Open Research Knowledge Graph. The project consists of a team with a number of people. It's actually a growing team. We have some postdocs, we have developers, research software engineers, as well as PhD students, and also some senior scientists on board. I would like to start with thinking how the world could be if scholarly communication would be a little bit more, or the information that we communicate in scholarly communication would be more machine readable, and sort of if the global scientific knowledge base would be more than a document repository, which I think is the case today also with publishers, which have surely more or less developed user interface, but more or less it's basically a document repository. Scientific information and knowledge is not really fair for machines. Currently findability surely could be better also for humans. Assuming open access, accessibility is okay. But then we have serious problems also with interoperability and reusability, which are essentially non-existent for machines. So the scholarly communications infrastructure is kind of stuck in the last century. We have surely seen digitization of documents that used to be in print, but this happened while in other areas, and I'm coming to some examples, we have seen a complete transformative digitalization. So this is how it has looked like for scholarly communication. So it's digitization over almost 4 centuries. Yes, we have we publish scholarly information today in digital documents, not anymore in print, but in the form as we do this, not much has really changed. And this is in contrast to digitalization elsewhere, for instance in mail order catalogs, which haven't been scanned, or you don't have simply a PDF version of the document on a website. You have a complete new information infrastructure that allows you to explore, search, recommend products in completely different ways. And something similar you have for locations and space. We have today digital information infrastructures where you can browse and search and explore space in complete different ways as compared to it was with printed maps. So the Open Research Knowledge Graph really tries to tackle some of these issues. In particular, we aim to build a digital library for machine actionable scientific knowledge that is communicated in scholarly literature. We try to do deep content analysis, not just bibliographic metadata, and as well as we are aiming to go beyond keywords. The infrastructure is multimodal. We try to acquire content via multiple modes, including crowdsourcing, text mining, as well as enhancing virtual research environments, among others. And we try to do so at a time when knowledge is created in the research life cycle, as well as when documents are written, submitted, published, or read. There is a public alpha version at the given URL. You can look at the documentation of the API as well as the code, which is available open source. Here's an example which comes from a paper in Life Science published by some authors at the Medical School of Hanover, and I'd like to focus on one particular sentence here in the results. And you can see that the sentence or the result consists of some natural language text, and that makes also a reference to images. So it's a combined, the information is combined in text and images, and the image 1b, figure 1b, consists of an assay as well as a plot of data. And now this information is one unit, if you want, and really hard to access for machines because it's one end natural language text, but also images. It's very hard to say whether there are 7 or 8 points here in the plot, or if it's 100 or 101. Even for humans this is very difficult, and for machines it's really hard. So the point is, how can we capture this information about this statistical hypothesis test, a sort of a description of this test, so that it is machine readable. And we try to do this by enhancing and advancing virtual research environments, in particular integrating some of the semantic technologies, and we do this here. You can see we are using Jupyter Notebook here to implement the t-test, and there is an additional function here, or two functions, that on one hand represent a description of the statistical hypothesis test, and then also store this description in some system, and that will be the ORKG here. This happens during the data analysis, or if you want the research data lifecycle, in the research lifecycle, and sometime down the road, in 6 months, 1 year or so, a paper is written and published. And when this is completed, you will obtain a DOI, and you can now use the ORKG UI to link metadata about the paper or other information about the paper with the research contributions that you obtained while during the analysis. And you can here now look up the DOI. You will get metadata for the DOI, which is here fetched from Crossref. You can classify the paper in a discipline, and more interesting is when you can start to describe the contributions of that this paper makes. In particular, contributions are they look at the research problem or a hypothesis. Here, iron deficiency in heart failure patients, and then we can now link here the contribution data, which is among others also a result. So this contribution yields a research result. And since it's already captured by the infrastructure, we can now look it up here by searching for IRE binding activity, and then simply link this information object describing the statistical hypothesis test with the contribution in this paper. We can then store the paper and then look at it. And as you can see, it now is on top of as a recently added paper and on the main page. We can look at it, and you can see the title, the metadata, as well as now the problem and the contribution data. And the contribution data is now also the result, and that's not simply a natural language text with some images, but you have now a machine-readable description of this statistical hypothesis test. In particular, you can see that it's a two-sample t-test with unequal variance. And you also have the output, that's the p-value, and as well as the data set that was used. And the data set is of course also represented in machine readable form, so you can extract this data, you can read it, you can integrate it with other data in much more machine actionable way as it was possible only on the paper. And for those who are interested, here is a representation of the graph itself for this paper and its research contribution. So you have here on the lower right corner the paper with the bibliographic data, so the authors, it links to the research contribution. The research contribution has a p-value. As output is here in particular a statistical hypothesis test, so it has a p-value as output, it has a data set as input, and the data set has a data structure definition and a number of observations. For the discussion, there are numerous challenges here. In particular, what's the structure of scholarly knowledge? Is there a common structure to scholarly knowledge across disciplines? This is an open question a little bit. How granular can the knowledge model really be to remain tractable in a system? So very rich knowledge models are difficult to populate, for instance. Implementing a multimodal infrastructure is also surely a challenge. Certainly an engineering challenge, how you combine all these methods. The crowdsourcing, as you know, like in Wikipedia, Wikidata, sort of relies on this 1990 rule, where 1% of the users generate content, 9% edit, make changes, and the vast majority really simply consumes content, reads, for instance. And the question is, does this rule apply to scholarly communication, where perhaps we need more of the users, in particular all authors or a significant amount of authors, to contribute content? Also interesting is interlinking with other research or science graph, and we have heard today also PIT graph, OpenAir, Explore, scholarly communication graph, research graph, Springer Nature graph, Microsoft Academic graph, and others. And it's certainly interesting to explore how we can integrate these various projects and systems, in particular also in the open science space. Thank you very much.